Oh, good afternoon. I am Dr. Paula Johnson from the IDRA EAC-South, and I am here today with a panel of amazing women, young ladies that are going to have a discussion around going back to school, getting schools ready to support students facing a new world of challenges. We are facing a double pandemic in that we are dealing with a worldwide virus, the COVID-19 virus, as well as a surge in fights for justice. There is a worldwide movement around civil rights of every type, and it is something that I just could not have even imagined that we would be in. But as schools begin to reopen, it is important for us as educators, as parents, as students, as advocates, as social justice warriors to bring to light the discrimination and opportunity gaps that have really shown themselves, have really manifested during these last several months. And we just want to have some conversations about what it's going to look like going back to school and what things we should be keeping in mind from a variety of perspectives. And so briefly, the Equity Assistance Center, the EAC-South, is one of the grants that IDRA is a recipient of from the Department of Education. And we serve 11 states and the District of Columbia. So we are Region 2. And I definitely wanted to have representation from across our region. And so we are going to be doing introductions. I'm going to introduce all the panelists, and then as we begin our conversation, they can add a little bit more to that in the work that they are doing or the studies that they are pursuing for my young ladies in their respective areas. So I want to begin with Dr. Martina McGee. She is an assistant clinical professor from the Department of Education at Auburn University. We also have with us Ms. Kim Patton from, she's the executive director of Life and New Restorative Justice here in Austin, Texas. We also have with us Ms. Karen Harrington, who is the director of student services for Pitt County Schools in North Carolina. And then our student panelists are Magoli Garcia, who is a freshman. Congratulations on your graduation. She'll be at DePaul University studying political science. We have Ms. Fatima Rasul, an 11th grader in the Shirt Cibolo Universal City ISD at Byron P. Steele High School. Go Knights. And then we also have with us Ms. Clarissa Davida, another 11th grader at Highlands High School in San Antonio ISD. Joining us from IDRA are also members of our Policy, Advocacy, and Community Engagement team, the PACE team. We have Ms. Chloe Sykes, Ana Ramon, and Terrence Wilson. So panelists, I wanted to start by opening the webinar with a question of a well-being self-check. You know, we have been at home for, more than 4 months now. And so if you would just, I know we're in grid style, so if you would just chime in and express how this time has been impacting you personally and then possibly professionally, of just, how are you feeling? How are you feeling about all that's going on in the world right now?
So I'll go once. I'll go and start. So personally, it's been really hard. I haven't been sleeping as well as I usually do. And so the emotional toll of the double pandemic has been rough. And so some things that I've done to help ease my frustration and stress and anxiety, I've been hiking more. There's a state park really close to me, and I'm in Alabama, and our governor didn't close down our state park, so I've been able to get out and hike. And I literally just made 2 dozen biscuits, and so I've been baking. Professionally, it's been really complicated. I work with teacher educator. I'm a teacher educator, so I work with teacher candidates. And trying to be as honest with my undergraduate students as possible around how I support them emotionally, right? But being realistic about what's happening and what does this mean for them as they are going through the program to be teachers, and what that means for them to get that in classroom experience, where I have to tell them I am first and foremost concerned about your safety, the safety of the children that you'll be working with and their teachers and their families. And so trying to figure out what does that look like and designing alternatives for my students so that they're getting some version of what it's like to be a teacher where they're safe emotionally and physically.
Thank you. Someone else? You're muted, Kim.
For me personally, more as you said, Dr. McGee, you been hiking. I've been just walking the neighborhood. We have a lot of hills downtown Austin, so I like to walk inclines to make me feel like I'm really doing something. So I stopped going to the gym. So I said, well, I'm just going to start walking, and I run a little bit. I noticed I'm cooking more. Going to the grocery store seems like every other day. At first, I was going like every other day, trying to get me some Clorox wipes and all this stuff, just in a panic. And then it's like, you know what? For my faith, God has this. Chill out. And so I just began to cook more. I wasn't looking for cleaning stuff. I was just going to buy groceries to cook because I said I'm not going to eat out. And they closed everything down. So it's time for me to cook. So I've been cooking more. I haven't baked anything, but I have been cooking more than usual. And my husband is happy about that. For school, professional-wise, it seems like I do more work now. We're getting so many calls on how can we support the students. We work with the formerly homeless community as well. So how do we engage them? Because just because they're not homeless anymore, they do have these tiny homes and they live in the RV, but they still are drinking. They're drinking more and drugging more. And so now we're trying to figure out how can we bring them together, because they're not going to get on Zoom. So how are we going to work with these individuals when we're supposed to have these 6 foot distance between us? But it's been kind of difficult there for that that case right there, working with the formerly homeless. But with the students and teachers, we've been on Zoom, just supporting them through the restorative practices process, and just doing more trainings and conferences via Zoom. Seems like I work more than I did when I was able to go into locations.
Magoli Garcia. I am a freshman at DePaul University. I am studying political science. At the beginning of when the pandemic first hit, I found myself feeling very complacent, especially when it comes to helping other people. Staying at home physically is different than, being out in the world when things were normal and being able to help others. So I tried to find other ways to help my community by volunteering at the food bank when I could, because I'm from San Antonio, Texas, and I believe the New York Times did an article about this. It was a photo about 10,000 cars lined up to receive food from the food bank. So when I saw that photo, I thought it was incredible how much need there was from our community. So I decided to do what I could, and I stepped in. But then when George Floyd's death happened, it shook the nation. And it's not something new, unfortunately. And when that occurred, there were protests and rallies happening in my own city. And, what we did was we got our posters. I got my cameras to document the event. And I reached out to youth in my community to create podcast series to talk about what are some solutions for the youth in our community to do if you're in a position where you can't go out and support at the protests, if you are still living with your parents, what are some ways that you can help the movement as well? And giving a platform to our Black youth as well. So that was some of the things that we have been doing, or I have been doing. But emotionally and mentally, it's been, with the constant update of news, 24/7, it's a lot. So I've had to take a break sometimes for sure. I've picked up the violin again. I stopped playing for a year or 2 years, so I picked it up again. My family and I, we do board game nights. We try to keep up with our artistic skills because we're a very heavy art family. So, we play music, we draw, we paint. So we've tried to reconnect with that side of us. But it's been a very hectic time, but I think the best way, at least for myself, that's worked is trying to get myself more engaged with my community and finding ways to help others is really helping myself as well.
Hi, so I'm Fatima, and I first want to start by saying thank you for allowing me to be here. Over these past few months, we have younger kids, so we have 2 kids under the age of 5. So it's a lot with my mom working. She's not physically going to work, but she is working at home. So I've obviously, as the older one, have to step up and do my part. So I think at the beginning of the pandemic, I was actually interested in going into the health field, like medicine field. But I think after having that alone time and not being at school, I kind of dug deeper and realized that that wasn't what I wanted to do. So it's just been a lot of trying to make it day by day instead of thinking long term. Okay, what can I do today that's different from yesterday? Instead of sitting in bed all day and giving myself some sort of change. So that was keeping me going for the first, I think, month of the pandemic. And then the second, the civil rights movement and the George Floyd and all the racial tension began. And at first it just hit so hard. And you started to have those conversations with people you go to school with, and you start talking to them and you're like, why do you think that? You start wow, you think different than what I thought you were going to think. And having the conversations, talking about it, and just seeing how much has changed. And so I have been trying to do my best. So I can't go to protest myself, but I went with a couple friends and we got signs and we stood at the corner of a street and we just had signs, "Let's honk for Black Lives Matter." So things like that. Also, I've just really been trying. There's obviously safety precautions, but I'm organizing a clothing drive because a lot of parents can't afford to keep their kids at home this school year, but don't have money to buy new clothes. So I'm organizing a clothing drive later within this next week for parents that can't afford to buy clothes for their kids. So I'm doing that. It's really just about taking it day by day. And as you said before, I don't want to butcher your name, so I'm just not going to. But sometimes I just need the break from social media and the news. So I'll just, delete all the apps real quick for a day or two. And then, after the day, getting my head together and just having that peace, I'll go back and I'll catch up. But I think I've had a lot of time to just focus on my career college, looking at colleges, looking at things I'm interested into. So that's one thing I am grateful for. It kind of just gave me a pause for me to think and reevaluate, because during the school year, it's school, coming home, schoolwork. So it gave me a nice break to just collect myself again. But now that I've collected myself, I'm like, okay, I want to go back. I want to get into it again. So yeah, that's just how I deal with it, just taking it day by day, really. You can't look oh, a month from now. It's no, that's too much to think about. Just worry about today. Yeah, that's what I try to do.
Hi, my name is Clarissa Davida. I am a junior at Highlands High School. And since the beginning of COVID, I've been definitely overwhelmed, and I feel very uneasy, and in a not an alarming way, it's been kind of depressing, especially because I have twin brothers that are younger than me, And when school was still in session, it was really difficult to try to get them to complete their assignments. It was kind of hard with getting their communicating with their teachers. But since school has ended, it's been a little bit easier to kind of cope with staying home, not being able to go out. Excuse me. And I've done a lot of what the team was saying, a lot of like just digging into myself and trying to figure out what I want to do for my my desired career choices, what I want to do. I've done a lot of online programs since March, and they've really just helped me like realize the problems in my community and how I can help change those. And I've spent a lot more time with my family than I would have before. We try to just stay away from the news, so we'll laugh and talk and play games and listen to music and sit outside and watch the birds. And it's really relaxing when you just kind of like get your mind off of things. We'll take drives, and for a second there, you're like out in the streets and you think like you completely forget about what's happening in the world. But the reality is when you get back home, you still have to worry about not going outside, not touching a lot of stuff, always wearing a mask. So it's just really overwhelming.
Okay, and I'm Karen Harrington, again, Director of Student Services in Greenville, North Carolina. And a lot of the things that you all said resonated with me. For me, it's been a little bit of a roller coaster. Initially, at home with my kids, trying to do my job and have them do school. So we would all sit at the dining room table together, and they would work up till about lunchtime. They're all younger. Last year, 5th and 6th grade. So right there all together. And so that was a little bit hard for me because I couldn't go into work, and there were a few people still working here in our central office, and that makes me anxious that I'm missing something or I should be doing more, and I had to do it all from online. We would weekly go in, and we had a church here that was providing food to our students, and so I would go and meet our school social workers, and my boys would help unload, and they loved that, and I finally realized it was the only time they got to go out at all, and so that of course they loved it. Although I mean they do like to do work like that, but they really just looked forward to it. But that was hard for me, and honestly I was still working 8 hours a day, and would have to shut it down. It was amazing that I could still do that much work online and never get caught up and never even touch the cart full of things that I took with me when I left here in March. But during that time, I would shut it down. And we had great weather for a really long time here. And my boys and I would walk, or we would just go outside and just enjoy some fresh air. I needed it after the computer time. And we're staying at home. And we did simple things like have a fire pit, and they cooked hot dogs on a fire pit, and they'd always wanted to do that. Even though we camp, we just usually don't cook the hot dogs on the fire pit, and they thought that was the best thing ever. And it made my husband and I realize that we do all these things, and we're always like have these crazy sports and Boy Scout and work and school schedules, and we do, and the kids are fine to just stay at home and cook. Like we did that several times because they loved it so much. So it was like a roller coaster because there was some of that slowing down was really good for me. We had a really tough situation right prior to the COVID incidents where we had a student commit suicide, a middle school student, and that became a fallout of bullying. And so the school system we were really in the defense mode, and so it was in a way a nice break. And then I'm back at work full time. We've been back for at least a month. I don't know, the time is just going really quick. Probably 6 weeks. So that is somewhat normal, and we are starting to play. So we're starting to play baseball a little bit. And so we're getting back to that hectic pace already that I didn't want to get back to. So it's just a roller coaster. And then right now we're just really engaged in the reopening planning and what is the right thing to do. And we're planning for this unknown, and we don't know how to do it. And it's just really overwhelming. So it is just a roller coaster of emotions. And so I think the thing I'm looking forward to today the most is hearing from the students, and we unique student perspectives here from these three women, because you guys are go-getters. But that's just touching my heart to hear the advocacy. As far as the second pandemic, I became involved in this work. I really came back to my school district to do work on discipline and the discipline disparity here in our district. And my job has evolved during that time. But I've been in this district 22 of my 25 years. And so we're doing that work, but it's at a slower pace than I want. So the racial issues on top of everything else have just been a lot. And I guess this is the good time to throw in the joke of my name's Karen, but I'm not that Karen. And so it's been hard being a Karen lately. So I might change my main name to middle name. I was going to open with that, but I wasn't sure if I should open with that or not. But that's hard for me, just to think, why did they pick Karen? So I can't remember which of the young ladies said that. I think it might have been Fatima. All of a sudden you're having conversations with friends or seeing their social media and you realize, why would my friend think this? So I've had to really just do a lot of pausing, and I'm trying to advocate, but also listen before I attack somebody else for something that I just cannot believe my friends think. So it's just a constant roller coaster. I'm proud of the people that think like I do, and I'm really shocked and hurt, and just don't know what to do about some of the others. So trying to listen more.
Thank you all so much for just sharing being vulnerable to share how you've been feeling. And also I've been making a list of all the activities as well, because the creativity, I keep saying that the innovation that the school closures and staying at home measures have proved is that we are truly innovative when we need to be. And we can find ways to pass our time. And I think that there are several things that echo across the world, really, about, especially the comment about like social media and news, that we ingest so much media on a daily basis that it really can just be overwhelming. And some of the emotional pull that Martina talked about, and that it can be very almost depressing, that Clarissa mentioned, that when you look at the big picture, it's scary. We are in scary times. However, what Clarissa also said, though, is that not in the bad way, like not being overwhelmed in a bad way or not being depressed in a bad way. It's an acknowledgement of the reality that we're living in right now. And that's a hard truth. Some of us have been living that for a long time, but the whole country and the world are now coming to understand what's really at the foundation of our societies. And so I think that is, but this is a great time. This is the best time to strike change. The advocacy that is developed, it just moves my soul that, Magoli, when you mentioned seeing that image of the cars lined up, and that motivated you to then do something about it. For so long, our society tends to, we see it, but because we see so much of it, we become, immune to it. But now there really is, this is a time for action, from the very small to the greatest. Like, so basically from ourselves, our individual selves, our homes, our community, to national platforms. So I want to move us into a conversation that all of you have kind of led into, is, what do we do when schools open? And so I really do want to start with the students. I wanted to start with Fatima and Clarissa, and then move on to Magoli, and then talk to the ladies as well, because they're very unique situations. But I wanted first to talk to our high schoolers, our rising 11th graders, yes? Yes. So you're in the sweet spot in high school right now, where you have enough time to make some decisions. You know, you're not in a rush. But you will be going back to our public schools here in San Antonio. And I wanted you to, if you would, to talk briefly about what have you chosen an option? What options are you being given for your return to instruction? And then, you know, what are your thoughts about them, or what are some responses to the options that you've been given?
Okay, so I'm in the SEUC ISD, amazing school district. So I am lucky enough that they gave us the choice to choose whether or not we would want to go back or not. I'm so thankful for that. I know that there's so many other districts that don't get that option, but luckily they said that we get the choice. So I am staying home and with my younger brother and then my niece and the 1-year-old who's going back to daycare, but it's only for essential workers. So we actually get that choice, which I'm, again, beyond grateful for, because who knows what would happen. But they are saying that the younger students do not have to wear a mask, like it's not required for them, which is scary because you're putting the staff at risk, you're putting the teachers at risk, anyone who comes into contact, and then the kid's family, and if they have older siblings along the district, or they have other family members who work with other children, like other schools. I don't think in general it was a good idea to open schools personally. In general, it was not a good idea. But I mean, looking at it from a social and emotional thing, I know that people really did not having that interaction. They did take it really hard. And it was hard for them not to see them all the time, go and have that personal contact and just staying in the house. So again, I just think that if we had to go back to school, that it should have been the option to have, you can go back or you won't, all around. I know that some districts are doing A and B days where some students go on some days and the other go on the other days, which I think is also a good idea. But again, I think that the choice of going back or not would have been the best decision all around if we were to open back up. That's just personally how I think, because I know that there are students that really, really missed out on the face-to-face, along with the younger generation, because, you know, when you're younger, you need that interaction to build those social skills. So that is important. But I just think personally, in general, schools opened way too early. We closed schools down with a couple of thousand of cases, and we're opening back up with so much more, 5 times the amount of that. So I just, doesn't work out.
So when it comes to talking about school and opening up with COVID, I think that it is a really tough decision. Nobody has ever been in the position to have to make this choice, and it's really hard, especially like I'm in high school, of course, and you know there are 1,700 kids that go to my school. Well, 1,700 kids that go to my school, not all of them are going to listen. You know, half of them go out, leave campus for lunch, even though we're not supposed to. So it's like, how are you supposed to stop them from doing that? And then I have 2 younger brothers. One of them will be in 6th and the other one will be in 7th. With that, you know, it's really hard for them to you know, I can't stay still and wear a mask for 8 hours a day and have to listen to the teacher and have to follow. I mean, I follow guidelines, but you know, it's really hard for younger kids. And I think my career choice is social work, and I like to do a lot of research with child safety and stuff. And I know that they brought up where a lot of the times when a child is being abused, it is noticed at school. And a lot of those cases are going unnoticed because, you know, there's no one to actually point out that the kid is hurting or there's something wrong that's going on in the house, so they cannot report it. So I think that it puts a lot of kids in danger. Both ways, you know, however you look at it, we're in danger. And I think that we have to for sure put the teachers' safety up there too, because it's a joint effort, and I come home to my grandparents and my great uncle who are elderly and have underlying conditions, and I help out with them. My mom helps out with them, and it's just hard to not see them, but also not be there to help them, because knowing that they need the help, and no one will be able to do that. And it's a lot to think about when it comes to school, because like I said, younger kids cannot possibly wear a mask for 8 hours a day. I can't even wear one for an hour. And it's hard. It's a hard decision, but I personally would like to stay online school. I think I learned very well, but for the younger kids, such as my brothers, the teachers spend 2-3 minutes asking, like 10 minutes almost, asking how their weekend was. And I agree that's really good to just like be involved in, what's going on. Are you okay at the house? Do you need anything? But at the same time, I just kind of feel like sometimes they're wasting like precious educational time. And it's really hard to make a decision. But personally, I choose online school.
So, I'm going to be a freshman in college, and my family and I have made the decision that my classes will be virtual. Because my school is in Chicago, we thought it would be best if I stayed in Texas due to my virtual classes. But I do have two younger siblings. I have one that is a sophomore in high school and one that is a seventh grader in middle school. So, unfortunately, we do have the privilege of going to one of the best school districts in San Antonio, in Bexar County, which is Alamo Heights. But when it comes to education, specifically in Texas, it's an understatement to say that our schools are not appropriately funded. When it comes to opening up in the fall, I think not only do we need to pay attention to our teachers who are either A, being forced to put their lives on the line to keep their jobs, but also we need to keep in mind of the students and families who may not have the same opportunities as everyone else. I recently went to the school board meeting for Alamo Heights School District on a different matter, and it was in the auditorium, and the room was physically divided. On one side, you had parents with signs saying that they wanted their students to go back to face-to-face schooling. On the other side, you had students, current students, alumni, and teachers saying that we needed to continue virtual learning. And for over 2 hours, it was back and forth. We need to open up our schools. Our teachers aren't doing their jobs. These parents have privileges. They don't understand what it's like to be a teacher. You're going to be putting more students and teachers at risk. So I think the best way to handle this situation is A, we need to fund our schools better. Secondly, we need to allocate the right resources to our students and families who are most in need. We can't claim that we need all virtual learning if you also have disabled students who depend on seeing their teachers in person. I don't want to speak for every parent who has a disabled kid, but they don't have the same. Chances are they don't have the same certifications as the teachers for their disabled students. So, what are we going to do for those students? What about the families who they have two working parents that are essential workers, and they have to go out, and they have 3 young kids at home that they can't stay at home alone. Who's going to watch them? It leads to a lot of different questions, a lot of issues. And I think, what Fatima, I think she brought up was, leaving it as a hybrid option. If we're going to be putting students and teachers back in schools, I believe we need to make sure it's in the safest way possible and making sure that there's no risk. I mean, there's always going to be a risk, but we need to limit it as much as we can and make sure that it's only an option for those who need it desperately. That means for the parents who are essential workers, for our disabled children and students, for our young students who cannot afford to stay at home, and those who can be more independent, such as our high schoolers or middle schoolers even, and for the families who do have those resources to stay at home, let them stay at home. That's what I personally believe from all the research that I've been doing, as well as what I heard what Alamo Heights is doing. They plan on presenting a plan of a hybrid plan for parents to choose, a face-to-face as well as virtual. Alamo Heights Foundation was able to allocate enough money to present over 5,000 iPads and computers and other resources for students who choose to stay at home. So I think this is amazing, but also keep in mind, Alamo Heights is known for having those funds. Other schools in San Antonio don't have that money to give their students the right resources. So it all comes down, I think, to how the state is funding its schools and how it's going to handle the future.
I'm entirely blown away that you're, and it's not that it's unexpected, because I know about the students that we work with a partnership and other organizations, but I always think out of the mouths of babes. This is not something that is unique to legislative policy. Students understand disproportionality. You guys understand haves and have-nots. And thank you for bringing to light some things that I think that a lot of the rest of us talk about on a regular basis, but we don't really know the depth that students really are aware of these same situations and these same concerns that we have about equity in schools. And then not just, and it's wonderful that they could allocate the iPads and tablets, Chromebooks, laptops. However, what you were alluding to is that in other districts and other parts of San Antonio, I can put a brand new laptop in a student's hands, but they're not going to be able to connect to the internet. And so
a little bit about what Paula is talking about is the digital divide. So we're going to go ahead and transition to listen to a little bit of Terrence Wilson. He is our Regional Policy and Community Director, and he is going to talk a little bit about equity and the digital divide.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. And I want to thank my colleagues for their comments. And, you know, the reason that I'm on this webinar today is really to provide a little bit more context around how we can think about some of these issues. And one of the prompts and one of the reasons behind this webinar was to talk about some of the long-term solutions to some of these challenges that we're facing right now, dealing with COVID-19 and the digital divide that has been a persistent issue with a lot of our communities. And from IDRA's perspective, you know, one of the things that we feel like is vitally important is really to have a process that includes families and students of all different backgrounds, and really to understand the context under which a lot of students from marginalized communities are going to be interacting in this new space. You know, this is really a great new frontier in some ways around some of the moves that are going to be making, and there is going to be a concern to make sure that the schools are going to have a concern to make sure that they're doing something to combat some of the situations that they're seeing, and that's a very important thing. But it's important for us at IDRA to make sure we're thinking about students from those marginalized communities, families from those marginalized communities, making sure they're involved in these processes, and also making sure that we're thinking long-term about the sustainability of these institutions, and that we're going to be promoting policies and practices that aren't going to harm our students in the long run. And so I'm an attorney, so a lot of the way that I think about things is from a legal perspective. And so there are a lot of different laws and policies that are going to be involved and that are going to be changing. Jordana mentioned earlier, there are going to be a lot of changes coming from the federal Congress that are going to have new opportunities for folks. And so we just thought it would be important, as we're talking about the digital divide and we're talking about ways that we can move forward as school communities, and that we make sure we're thinking about how these issues are going to impact some of our most vulnerable students. And through the EAC, as Michelle mentioned in the beginning of this webinar, we're really focused on making sure schools are equitable as it pertains to race, as it pertains to culture, ethnicity, as it pertains to gender and religion. So those different populations are going to have different responses as we're trying to move forward. And so the first part of what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the context and how, as things are changing and rules are changing with regard to virtual instruction, how it might have an impact on a lot of different categories that are included in the digital divide, that we want to make sure we have in the front of our minds as we're making policy choices and policy changes. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of some of those long-term sustainability things that you can do involving families to make sure that you're bringing them along and there are no students that are going to be left behind as we make changes. And so there are a number of different policy areas where we think that, the changes that are being made as a result of COVID-19 and the coronavirus and the way that we've, really fundamentally changed how students are being educated, at least in the short term, there are a lot of different impacts that we think they're going to have. So one example we think that is going to be impacted is obviously with funding, right? With students staying home and with families staying home, there's going to be just less funding for our schools. So as we're looking at how to expand access and how to provide, different kinds of connectivity to our students, we have to also keep in mind that, because people have stayed home for the last few weeks and maybe staying home for several weeks to come, those sales tax revenues, those other kinds of budgetary impacts are going to be there, right? And so there's going to be situations and conversations going forward about how to deal with having, less money as a result, right? So when you're looking at how to increase the digital or how to decrease the digital divide, you want to make sure you understand that funding is going to be a huge part of that. None of the solutions that were mentioned by my colleagues in the previous presentations, none of those things, I won't say none, but few of those are free and they take a lot of planning and they're going to take resources and support. But you also have to realize there's going to be less of that money to go around. And so whether it's at your local school level or at the state level or even at the federal level, there's going to be some impact from the fallout in our economy from families and students staying home. And we also want to make sure that, while we're focusing on new resources for communities to keep them connected, we also have to remind ourselves that there are certain students from certain, vulnerable populations or marginalized populations that are the needs that they have are going to persist, right? Whether there's this coronavirus situation or not, there are still some children that are students that need, meals and need health care, need, other kinds of support, mental health support and healthcare support. So it's really going to be important for us to remember how we're going to move forward, given those needs of students that aren't going to be going away. When we're going to have billions of dollars in revenue potentially lost, across the country, how can we move forward in a way that is keeping in mind some of those other challenges that these students have? We think about, in terms of higher education, with the way that the schools have gone, there are going to be a lot of changes with regard to who can graduate and how students can graduate. And especially, when we're talking about students of color and other marginalized students, making sure that those students who are relying on some of these virtual ways of instruction and from whatever perspective, they may not have the access, how is that going to impact their ability to go to college as going into next semester and the next school year? When we're doing planning, how we're going to make sure we're keeping young people on track to get to college or whatever postgraduate plan they may have in their future. When we're thinking about English learners, we're thinking about obviously how our school's going to be communicating with folks whose native language is not English in their home, right? And so when we're talking about connectivity and we're talking about, iPads and infrastructure and Wi-Fi, we also have to really think about communication in the way that, students and families whose first language is not English and who do not speak English at home, we have to really be conscious about the way that we communicate with those people across these digital platforms and making sure that the same access that they have to an individual person that can communicate with them is going to be maintained regardless of the way that communication goes out. And especially thinking about the way that assignments are delivered, if they're going to be sent out or mailed out, how's that going to impact folks whose English is not their first native language? So these are all questions that we have. I think one of the other issues that comes up for us as students are spending more time at home is really about, making sure that we're thinking about what the impact of the situation is on them, right? So there's a way that people interact when they're together that allows you to check on one another, that allows you to be there for your fellow students, it allows teachers to check on students. And so as we're interacting in this virtual way, how do we maintain those relationships that you can make sure that people are okay, that people are getting the support that they need? There are a lot of parents who are spending more time with their students than they plan to. Right? How are we making sure that they have the capability to fulfill that time and make those productive learning environments, right? If they're limited English speakers, or if they have other challenges, relating to having to work or their own education levels, how can we make sure that those experiences that our students are having in this virtual world are going to be fulfilling and they're going to be productive? And then I think that, one of the things that's going to be really important, and Renee mentioned a little bit about this, is as we're trying to move forward, making sure that we remember that this is an extreme situation and that there are going to be a lot of folks that are coming along trying to do things differently and provide different kinds of services to our students, and is making sure that we're careful with the new ways that we're going to try to educate our young people, the new tools that we're going to put them in, the new programs we're going to put them in, the new kinds of ways to learn information. While we think it's vitally important to close the digital divide and that folks have access to digital services, and I think that there is something to be said about understanding that there is a value in in-person instruction, there is a value in public schools, that individual connection can't necessarily be replaced. And then also just, education works differently for each kind of student. There's not going to be, every student is not going to be able to sit behind a computer and get their instruction and guide themselves to the way that they need to be. And then just finally, I think that as we're seeing all of these changes with regard to testing and other modifications that have been made, how is that going to reflect on the health of the school districts that our students are in? How are these assessments that are given digitally, how are they going to impact, right, based on the way that our students learn? And also, how is that going to impact the health of our school districts? And so I think that there's a lot of different ways that we can think about dealing with those issues and moving forward. But from IDRA's perspective, one of the things we think is vitally important is making sure that families and communities are involved in that process. Part of this webinar was, again, to talk about long-term solutions. And we really believe that, creating a culture in your school buildings around collaboration, where the perspectives of diverse communities and diverse families are valued, is something that one of the best things you can do to have, productive conversations and to make productive decisions going forward in how to change and how to close the digital divide. And it's vitally important that no matter, what the challenges are of those parents, of those families, and those caregivers in those families, that the school districts understand what they are, right? So if it's a digital question, that the school district knows who has internet, who doesn't, that they assess that constantly, and that they also work together with families and communities to meet those challenges, whether it's working with individual groups of parents through a PTA, whether it's working through a community organization that's located in that school district, whether it's just going out into communities to see folks in the way that, it's going to be possible given the distancing requirements that we have. I think that it's going to take a lot of active effort, but if we're thinking about how to make long-term sustainable change, it's vitally important for us to include families and communities in that effort. And so while it's incredibly important that we're having this conversation, and we really do think that closing the digital divide is something that is vitally necessary, we also think that the way that we get there is important, right? And then it's important for us to realize that students and families are dealing with a lot right now, and it's important for them to be able to be a part of whatever comes next. And so it's our job is to kind of help support how those processes come about, whether it's getting support from IDRA on how to build family engagement in this area and how to work with students around these different areas of challenge. We think it's really important to think about how to move forward with parents and with communities if we're really going to make long-term change and close the digital divide and make our schools more equitable overall.
Thank you so much.
And I really
appreciate all of your wise words.
Okay, It's my turn, so I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about some ideas of what you can do offline. So the infrastructure is just not there.
I said it's not something that you can build overnight. Jordana has provided us with a lot of really awesome resources, and she's going to continue the conversation. And so will Renee. So they are going to share with us different things that all of us can do to bridge that digital divide. And then, of course, Terrence and our policy team is there for you guys as well. But again, when all else fails and there are no options, then you're still going to want to communicate with your students. There has to be other ways that that we can continue learning. And so here are a couple options. These are offline options. So if your district is providing students with Chromebooks, then students can work offline. Of course, they will have to have initially an internet connection so they can get to the resources that you're providing. But when they're at home, they can work offline. There's also a Remind phone app, and then there's Freeconferencecall.com. So let me kind of talk a little bit about each one of those. So for Google Offline, students can save and open Google Docs, Sheets, Slides, all of those things offline. But before you can do that, you must be connected to the internet, as I mentioned just a second ago. And then also, you'll want to talk to your school's technology department. It may be a feature that they've disabled, and so you'll want to make sure that it's enabled before you pitch the idea to a student. Also, you'll want to make sure that the students have access to the Google Chrome browser. So if they're using a Chromebook, that's not a problem. But if they're using any other type of device, you'll want to make sure that Google is installed on that device. Also, Google Offline will not work on any private browsing. So if you're in incognito mode or if you are using Safari, it's not going to work. And then you'll want to install and turn on the Google Docs Offline Chrome extension. Again, you want to make sure that there's enough available space on the device that the student's using so that when they are working offline, the machine can handle the storage capacity that the student's going to need. And then when the student's done, what will happen is at some point during the week, they'll be able to hopefully, kind of like what Jordana was saying, is access one of the free and open Wi-Fi hotspots that's available through our public organizations like the school, the public library, or the school campus, or Starbucks, or McDonald's. I mean, a lot of those places you can park in the parking lot and use access. I mean, I've done it before as a student myself. So it's, the Wi-Fi is available, but the students will have to connect at some point. So thinking about the parent schedule, the student schedule, just kind of keep that in mind because the students can do their work, but you may not receive it till the end of the week. All right, so the Remind app. The Remind app is something that you would use on your cell phone, or you can use it on your computer, or you can actually use it on an iPad or tablet. It's a website that allows teachers to create groups or classes, and then once those classes are created, then you would send out a message to your students. So, barring the fact that you're not going to be sending it on their phone, you would have to communicate in some way that they would have to join the group with a code. So your students will have to download the app, or the parents, and then they would sign in with the code, and that code is going to allow you guys to two-way communicate so the teacher can send information out to the students, and then the students will be able to respond. It's a completely free app. It's built for schools. If you don't already have access to it, definitely download that and try it out. And then last but not least, you have Freeconferencecall.com. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's what the service does is once you sign up for it, and it's completely free, they're going to provide you with a number that you can provide to your students. And it'll also provide you with a meeting number, and it's going to provide you with a host number. And so once your students sign in on that phone number, they'll just call on their phone to the number that you provided. They'll use the meeting code, And then you can have multiple people on a phone call at once. So if you need to get a hold of your students and you want to set up like office hours or lecture time or small group instruction, you can do it via the conference call app. You can also record any conversations that you're having. You'll definitely want to let your students know that some of the conversations may be recorded. Your students will hear an automated voice response when the conversation goes into record mode, so they'll know that it's being recorded, but you'll want to also just kind of let them know why. So you may want to use the feature of recording a phone call in tandem with any video lectures that you may be creating. So then this way you'll have an audio file that you can text to your students versus having, you know, a video file. Again, it's just more resources that you can leverage to ensure that your students that are not able to log on a daily basis will have the resources that they need to continue learning. Last but not least, a colleague of mine, Dr. Stephanie Garcia, shared an article with me the other day, and it's a very, very powerful article. It talks about this family that's here locally in San Antonio that has been provided with a Chromebook for each of their students, and there's several students in the household, but the parents cannot take advantage of the free Wi-Fi that the internet service providers are doing during this time because they have outstanding balances. And so again, as educators, I think it's just really important to remember that some students have obstacles that are harder to overcome than others. And so with this family, you know, again, they're trying to participate. They're trying to do everything they can to make sure that their students have access, but the obstacles are just too hard to overcome. So I say all of this because, again, as educators, we want to ensure that learning is happening, and we want to ensure that we are meeting students where they are. There's no silver bullet, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution. So I applaud all of the districts and all of the teachers for everything that they're doing. But just know that there are going to be some students that are just not going to be able to use the resources that are being provided without some kind of accommodation. So this presentation is going to be available on the IDRA website. So you'll have a link to this article so that you can read it. In the meantime, I think I just want to also talk about one other piece of the article. It does show you by district locally here in San Antonio the device gap. So not only is there the digital divide with internet connectivity, as Terrence was talking about earlier, there's a device gap. So even if the students are being provided with Chromebooks, please know that not all districts are able to do that. So there may only be one computer at home. There may not be any computers at home. There may just be tablets. Wi-Fi. So this family that's in this particular article, the mother can provide a hotspot for her students on her phone, but that's dependent on the fact that she's home because she is a working mother, and then also on it's dependent on the data. So she knows that if she just puts the Wi-Fi hotspot on, that data will get sucked up within one evening, and then they won't have any internet access for an entire month. So again, you know, be cognizant of that and just kind of talk to your students to find out where they're at in regards to those issues so that you can make the accommodations that they need. All right, so at this time,
we're going to go ahead and get some last comments from each of our presenters. Let's go ahead and start with Renee.
No, I think you really hit home that last point. You know, solutions need getting out of your comfort level is like out of the question at this point. Like we're all trying things and solutions that have never, maybe in some cases haven't been done before by your organization. So keep an open mind and don't be afraid to try, because the worst that can happen is that it won't work, and you got to learn how you can tweak your solution. So Yes, this is appears to be an insurmountable type of a problem, but I'm confident that the fact that you're here listening to webinars today and you're seeking more resources and information is exactly what you need to be doing. And with the right in your own organizations and other partners that you have to do your projects, I'm a firm believer and I'm optimistic that we're going to figure this out together. And us as digital inclusionists and others that provide expertise in this area, I know we're here for you. It's almost like the major leagues are here, and we're ready to be called up to help out. So this is a very wonderful thing to be a part of. I thank you so much, and the IDRA for thinking of this webinar series. And yeah, let's put some rapid responses into work.
Jordana?
Thank you, Michelle. I'm likewise. I'm grateful that we're able to reach such a large audience and very important local government, our school districts that have a lot of role to play in closing the digital divide in partnership with cities, which are another very powerful tool in closing the digital divide because of their ownership of rights of way and poles and infrastructure that can be a backhaul to open access networks and free networks that we're going to, I think this experience has made a case for immediately and in all the ways that we can, from access in the home to access in multifamily housing in low-income areas to access in parking lots and things like that. Just making access to broadband ubiquitous so we won't have these issues. As far as the devices and making sure we're looking at the three legs of the stool of digital inclusion, that's so important, Michelle. I'm glad you pointed it out. It's some of the foundation of our work at the Federal Reserve is, hey, you can't just do one of these things. We have to try to work on all three things, the affordability and the service itself, which has to do with the access to the infrastructure, the affordability of the devices, and the training and technical assistance that we can also make available. So all of those things are important. And as I am finalizing this document that's going to be made available to you on the IDRA website, I think you'll find some resources that are trustworthy and some immediate action that you can take with your local providers, with us who are mobilizing in San Antonio with the city and CPS Energy and others we can make broadband more available to whole neighborhoods. We're looking at those options and looking at the technologies that are going to allow us to do that more quickly in the model of, for example, what we did in FAR with the city of FAR, very creative and innovative mayor, Ambrosio Hernandez, and the school district in bringing connectivity to the families, to the students, to close the homework gap. So we're going to make all of that available to you so you can see what works, and then we're going to be looking very closely at the legislation right now for COVID-19, the legislation before the Congress right now, which will free up E-rate funds and which are very important to the building of the networks for schools, which I'm sure many of the IT officers at the schools know that very well because they've probably done E-rate grants and built their own fiber in their school. But also loosening up, there's also some calls to loosen up some of those E-rate requirements. So if that you can use, so we're going to look at that as well. Are we going to be able to open up your networks in some ways to the neighborhoods around you, even though E-rate has strict guidelines? So looking at opening all that up, the current legislation with E-rate and Lifeline is all going to be very important. And then as well, we're calling together the internet service providers like Spectrum and others, and really looking at some of their very low-cost services and how we can help subsidize families or bring those services to families. Spectrum has Internet Assist. The other companies have different programs, very, very low cost with enough speed and capacity for multiple devices if you have several children in the family. And they need to do these Zoom classes with their schools and teachers, that makes it possible for them. So we're looking at all these areas as well as the devices and any technical assistance. And so we'll be updating you through the IDRA website, certainly with a handy guide, but also just as we learn, as we're all learning together how to do some of these immediate things. And of course, the Federal Reserve, we've been publishing on this issue for a long time. We want to use the best practices to help school districts and cities understand the incredible role that they can play in investing in broadband infrastructure to make open access networks that Renee works on possible, and to use that backhaul to be able to do that. So we have short-term, we're looking for short-term, and we know the kind of the long-term solutions and where we will actually want to be, so we're not in this position again in the event of a future emergency. So thank you very much for having me. We want to be a resource. This is important to the safety of our community. This is important to our country and our economic well-being of our families and financial stability, the ability to work from home, and ability to stay safe and get through this in the most effective and humane way that we can. And technology is just a means to an end. It's what we're talking about is investing in our young people and investing in people, so that when you're talking about these kinds of investments, so that they can reach their full potential and be productive citizens and have great and prosperous lives. So thank you very much.
No, thank you. And you brought up some really interesting points. I mean, it's like you said, I mean, during this time, we're very fortunate to have the technology we have, even though it doesn't always work perfectly, right? I mean, again, I apologize I literally was switching over from one machine to another during this webinar, and it was chaotic. But at the same time, it's possible, right? So we know that things aren't going to be perfect, like you and Renee mentioned, but we have to kind of test everything that we have and push it to the limits that we currently can push it, so that we know where the holes are, and those are the things that we can fix. And with everybody being at home, I'm sure, just like the way the electrical grid is burdened during the summer, right now it's the internet grid that's being burdened, right? So things that we took for granted are now really in the forefront of our minds. And if people want to see doctors, we're doing that through telehealth, right? If we're working, and we're very blessed to have that option from home through the internet. And so the families that don't have that capability are losing income. So just as you said, I mean, it's really all aspects of life at this point. And hopefully we'll get to a point where the internet is a utility and it's not just seen as a luxury, because I think that's really what's going to help the families that are disproportionately affected by the digital divide make those strides. So I'll go ahead and ask Terrence, how about you? Do you have any other comments that you'd like to make before we end the conversation?
I mean, you all have said it so well. I think from my perspective, it's really just a conversation about equity, and part of making sure our schools are equitable is making sure we understand what the needs are of our students. And so to the extent possible, I think it's vitally important that we understand what people have access to and what they don't. And I think going forward, it's vitally important to involve those folks who are going to be most impacted in the decisions that are going to be made. And so IDRA is here to help. These webinars, our staff, this is what we do, and we believe in this wholeheartedly. So I encourage folks on this webinar, if they have questions, to reach out to us. But I think it's really important, the investment, as Jordana said, it's vitally important for us to invest in our students for our future, but it's also as important that we do it equitably in a way that understands how to meet people where they are and to give them what they need. So I'm just very fortunate to be a part of this conversation, and I hope that it continues and that we can bring in more of those folks who are going to be impacted by these policies in the future.
Awesome. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and end it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we look forward to seeing you next week at the next webinar. Goodbye.